So let me show you what changed in NX 12.7 related to the Storybook setup for React applications. So here we have an NX React setup where we have one application generated and a library, which is here the React UI library. And we are, as mentioned, specifically interested here in that Storybook folder and what the setup looks like. Now, this is a library that has been generated like with an older version of NX, which is basically before 12.7 has been released, which had the following setup. So you have basically that main.js, which first of all imports a main.js from basically the root folder of our NX workspace. And the reason for that is that we always basically pre-configured a root level Storybook folder as well, which allows to have like global configurations, right? So if you want to have certain add-ons for all our stories that are within our NX workspace, this is the place where to configure that. And similarly here, we have a global webpack config, which allows you to alter the webpack config of Storybook at the global level. If you don't need that, you can just like set all the customizations here locally. And then another part is that webpack config. So the webpack config contains quite a lot of content. First of all, it also imports the global webpack config as we have just seen. And then it defines here the various rules specific for this Storybook setup. Now you can see we have here a custom tsconfig path mapping because like we have this tsconfig base JSON, which needs to be discovered properly by Storybook such that we can, in our components, import other libraries from our NX workspace. There's also rules for SVG customization. There's rules for different URL loaders to make sure we're able to load different kind of formats or SVGR setups and much more. And so this file was really long and kind of tedious because like people could also modify this, which was also hard for us to upgrade NX workspaces as we want to do automatically, right? And so apart from the configuration that is in there, one of the main problems was that like the setup between the React application, like how the components are being rendered there, might in some cases differ slightly what Storybook renders. And the reason for that is if we look into the workspace JSON and at the configuration of our React application here, we can see here our demo application, and what it uses here is the now web executor. So this is like a webpack configuration which we export as part of the now web package, which already takes into account all those things which we have seen in the Storybook setup, right? So it makes sure that you can load like the components properly, the tsconfig is set up properly, like you have all those loaders already there for various different style sheet formats, all the things which usually you have to configure otherwise within here manually. And the reason is also because Storybook provides its default setup of default styles. And so you need to configure your story to match whatever is being used by the local React application. And so to improve the developer experience in 12.7, we have added a new React preset for Storybook. And so to showcase this, let me first generate a new React library. And let's call it UI. And as you can see here, this generates basically a new UI library here without any configuration yet. So let's add this Storybook configuration. And again, I can use a generator. And I give it the name of the library I want to generate the configuration for. And so here you get a couple of questions. So every Storybook is able to also generate some Cypress tests for you. So now in this case, I don't want to use that. I definitely want to generate automatically stories for my current components in that library. And I also don't need the Cypress end-to-end that's being generated for now. And so what this does is it generates, again, this Storybook folder. And by opening it, you can already see that there's quite a difference, right? So first of all, there's no webpack config anymore. And also, like if we look in the main.js, it's much more compact, right? So we still have the root level main import because like that's a useful feature and we definitely want to keep that. So this is being destructured here in this local object that we export. There's still the stories, which again pulls in the root level configuration in case and then the local configuration for this library. But the most like interesting piece here is definitely this type of setup. So this is the Storybook preset, which we export as part of the now React package. And this preset underneath already pre-configured Storybook for you, such that you use the very same configuration as your local NX React application. And so there are no more differences in the rendering, and you also don't have to care about like configuring it differently. So if the component runs within the application and you load it up within a Storybook, it will be rendered in the very same way. You can also obviously configure this a bit further, so we can actually extend the syntax here of these add-ons by providing a proper object. and giving it this here a name. And then we can give it like an options property here, which you can use then to further customize how this preset should behave. One option, for instance, is like the styles preprocessor options, which allows us to give here like some include paths. And so this is useful, for instance, if we have a library locally and in our SCSS files, for instance, we want to import like different kind of variable definitions or different mix-ins from some other files, then you can actually give it here the path to that library. Let's say like here we have a corporate guidelines, which has like in its source lib folder all the SAS files. That way it would allow us in our component to just import them within the SAS files without having to kind of use relative paths or whatever. But this is like the default setup, which is much easier and usually in 90% of the case would work. You always still have the capability and the possibility to customize your webpack config. What Storybook did here in this webpack final property is instead of having like a separate webpack.config file, you can actually use this property directly in your main.js file, and you will get here the configuration of the webpack config. And so you can take a look at that, inspect it, add new loaders, add new modules in there that suit your needs, which you might have like more specific ones within Storybook setup. And what it also does, it potentially like obviously calls the root level webpack config configuration, which you might have. And now since we are here in a mixed workspace, meaning that we have some stories that are still configured with the old setup, where we have like a global webpack config, what we do here is we also make sure that we extend that one as well to make sure we have the backwards compatibility. Once you have dropped that global webpack config.js, definitely feel free to just remove this one here and go ahead. So have a look at our nx.dev guides. There's a section of Storybook there, which includes like more details of this new setup. So definitely check that out and let us know what you think.